Juanita Bynum, a towering name in the gospel world, known for her fiery sermons and spiritual authority, has just delivered a revelation that has rocked the faith community to its core. At the age of 66, the woman many called a prophetess didn't just speak. She unleashed a bombshell so shocking, it left believers and leaders across the country stunned. This wasn't a typical message, a moment of inspiration, or a teaching for Sunday morning. No, this was something far deeper, far more personal, and far more controversial than anyone expected. With a legacy built on bold truth and raw testimony, Juanita chose this moment to lift the veil on a secret she's kept hidden for decades. A secret that could shake the very foundations of how we view leadership, spirituality, and even deliverance itself. What did she reveal? Why now? And how are leaders reacting behind closed doors? This isn't just a confession, it's a spiritual earthquake. For years, one of the most controversial conversations in the faith community has revolved around Juanita Bynum's infamous $599 prayer class, an event that promised spiritual transformation but left many questioning its true purpose. Was it a divine encounter or just another high-ticket hustle? People wondered what could possibly justify such a staggering price for access to prayer. Was it personal guidance, supernatural healing, or something deeper? As whispers turned into outrage, the ministry found itself under intense scrutiny, and the truth behind that price tag became a mystery that demanded answers. But when Juanita finally broke her silence and addressed the controversy head-on, what she revealed was far more complex than anyone imagined. She didn't just defend the cost, she unraveled the layers behind it, exposing a reality filled with spiritual warfare, personal sacrifice, and the unseen burdens of ministry leadership. Her explanation wasn't just about money, it was about value, calling, and the price of purpose. And whether you agree with her or not, one thing is certain, the truth behind that $599 class isn't as simple as it seems, and it's shaking the faith community like never before. Utterly unexpected turn, Juanita didn't just discuss spiritual development and breakthroughs. Instead, she talked about something that many people didn't want to hear, the business side of her ministry. She disclosed how her $1,499 prayer class was actually a part of a more intricate financial system that was essentially about funding her ministry. Before you pass judgment, know that this isn't just a case of exploitation or greed. Over the years, Juanita's ministry had faced its share of challenges. As her ministry grew, Juanita acknowledged that the $1,499 was not only about providing spiritual guidance, but also about keeping her ministry afloat. Yes, she was charging for the experience, but not just for the prayers. It was a way to fund a massive operation that she couldn't sustain without charging people for these things. Owning a global ministry is not easy. It requires resources, staff, travel, venue costs, security, marketing, and more. But wait, this is where things get really juicy. Juanita claims that this wasn't the only financial strain she had to deal with. As a preacher and the head of a global ministry, she had to maintain appearances and present a public persona and brand that matched the high standards people expected from prominent figures in the gospel world. She was now a member of an exclusive group of spiritual leaders who, in addition to preaching the Word of God, also promoted themselves as luxury brands. What makes this story unique is that Juanita wasn't the only one receiving attention for her expensive classes. As the controversy grew, another well-known figure in the gospel industry, Landria Johnson, you may know her as the Grammy-winning gospel singer, stepped into the spotlight. Spreading the gospel is no longer about creating a brand that people can connect with. It's about creating something that's as much about business as it is about faith. The whole situation took a dramatic turn when singer Landria, who is known for her bold opinions, responded to Juanita's $1,499 prayer class in a way that left everyone talking. Rather than silently supporting these expensive events, Landria took to social media and didn't hold back, questioning the morality of charging so much for prayer in order to have a chance to connect with God. However, her response wasn't just a simple comment. She went one step further by addressing the issue in her. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Landria's remarks sparked a flurry of reactions. Some applauded her for speaking the uncomfortable truth and calling out the excesses of the gospel industry, while others criticized her for openly criticizing the rise of high-ticket ministries that take advantage of people's faith for financial gain. She talked about her own experiences in the gospel industry and how she had to conform to a system that demanded she conform to an image of wealth and success even in ministry. But just when you thought the drama couldn't get any more intense, Leandria's criticism went a step further. She was worried about something much deeper than the money, the spiritual toll that these expensive ministries could have on vulnerable people. This is where the controversy lies. Was this about money, or was it about the very nature of faith itself? As you can see in the story surrounding Juanita Bynum's leadership, as the drama surrounding Juanita Bynum's $1999 prayer class continued to unfold, people began to ask even more serious questions. Could this kind of high-ticket event really be about money or high-ticket prices? It's about something much bigger that's been simmering in the gospel world for years. The question everyone is asking is what's really happening behind the scenes of these expensive events? Is this just a reflection of a broken system? And how far will this go before it all comes crashing down? The fact that Juanita, who had established herself as a woman of faith and influence over the years, wasn't backing down made the situation even more complex. As pricing became the norm in the gospel world, could it be a sign of a change in how ministries are run, especially for the bigger names? More and more people realized that the problem wasn't just about Juanita. Rather, it was part of a larger trend in the gospel industry where leaders were fusing spirituality with business in ways that raised eyebrows. She stated that it was not only about providing people with a spiritual experience, but also about making sure the ministry could continue to operate at the scale it had grown to. In a sense, she was attempting to defend the price tag by portraying it as a necessary evil for the survival of her work. But she didn't take back her statement or apologize for charging $1,099 for a prayer session. Instead, she strengthened her justification. The public began to realize that there was a growing culture in the gospel world where the lines between faith and commerce were becoming blurred. It wasn't just about saving souls anymore. It was about branding image and, let's face it, the bottom line. People started comparing themselves to other well-known preachers and ministries that had also faced similar controversies. These were the same preachers whose names had been associated with wealth, luxury, and larger-than-life lifestyles. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what it meant to be a person of faith in the modern world. Could someone be a successful spiritual leader without having to cater to the pressures of wealth and fame? These were the questions that began to haunt both people's minds when the issue hit home for many. The question wasn't just whether charging 1,000 might for prayer was right or wrong. It was about what it meant for the future of the faith itself. Juanita's predicament wasn't unique. Leandria Johnson's candid critique of the expensive prayer class sparked a much-needed discussion in the gospel industry. Leandria wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for an entire generation of preachers and gospel artists who felt the pressure to maintain their status through financial means. As a Grammy-winning artist, she had also experienced similar difficulties and was constantly under pressure to maintain a public image. As she freely revealed in interviews and social media posts, this pressure wasn't just about looking successful, it was also about remaining relevant in a field that was becoming increasingly focused on wealth and image. Leandria didn't just talk about her own experience, she also started to question the larger system, asking aloud whether the gospel industry had become more about the celebrities than the people in the spotlight. Message they were meant to spread, and when she started to make the connection between high-risk prayer sessions and the demands of running a profitable ministry, it became real. She revealed something that many had been avoiding, the growing perception that gospel ministries were shifting from being about spiritual development to being more about making money. However, this is where things became complicated. While many praised Leandria's candor, others accused her of being hypocritical. Claiming that Leandria had benefited from this accusation of hypocrisy left Leandria in an awkward position, but it also made people reevaluate what it meant to profit from gospel music and ministry. She was not unfamiliar with the financial side of the business. Her music, concerts, and even her brand had generated revenue, and people were quick to point out that no one had voiced concerns when she was benefiting from the same system she now criticized. Where do you draw the line between a legitimate business venture and something that could be perceived as the debate raged on? Was it exploitative for preachers and gospel artists to profit from their work as long as they stayed true to their mission? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with charging outrageous prices for spiritual experiences, even if you had the best of intentions? Some claim that preachers and gospel artists should be paid for their time, talent, and effort because ministry was exhausting, emotionally taxing, and involved constant travel and leadership responsibilities. Others countered that the gospel should never be monetized in such a way that it was a message that had to be freely given without the expectation of financial gain. But this was not a debate that could be resolved quickly. It was too complicated and entangled in issues of faith, business, and personal integrity. And this is where things start to get complicated. The discussion began to move away from just Juanita and Leandrea and towards something more disturbing: the effect that these expensive events had on the attendees. This is where the story takes a darker turn, one that makes you wonder what the real motivations behind these events were. What would have happened to the faithful who were attending these classes, these events, these expensive gatherings? Were they really getting the spiritual nourishment they needed, or were they being led astray to believe that the only way to connect with God was through pricey prayer sessions and exclusive, high-priced experiences? Would the public demand a return to authenticity, to the pure gospel free from the taint of commercialism? Or would the system of expensive events continue to flourish despite the criticism as the debate continued to escalate? A surprising twist came from an unexpected source: the very followers who had once blindly supported Juanita Bynum. They started to question her. How long would it take for things to change in the gospel world? Motives and her ministry's financial structure. Many of them had previously supported the idea of paying for spiritual experiences, believing that the cost was commensurate with the value they were receiving. However, as the controversy gained traction, some of her most devoted supporters began to feel uneasy, questioning whether their financial contributions were actually benefiting the ministry or just enriching its leaders. These were the ardent supporters, the ones who had been to Juanita's events, purchased her books, and listened to her sermons. They had trusted her and believed in the message she was preaching. But now, after hearing the criticism and seeing the increasing public backlash, they couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The more they considered it, the more they realized they weren't just paying. This change in perspective caught many off guard. The wave of doubt among her followers didn't just surprise Juanita. It rocked her to her core. She had built her career on the trust and faith of these people, and now they were questioning everything. Her ministry was no longer just about providing prayer and guidance. It had become a business, a brand, and that brand was being scrutinized. They were paying for the privilege of being in the presence of someone they believed to be above them in status, someone whose time and wisdom had become a commodity. Evident in her public remarks, she attempted to defend her actions by claiming that the funds were essential to the ministry's ongoing success, and that it wasn't just about her, but also about her larger vision for sharing the gospel. However, the more she talked, the more it appeared that she was fighting to maintain the very thing that had made her famous and credible. The discussions among her supporters behind closed doors were far more serious than anyone had anticipated. Some of her followers who had unquestionably admired her in the past started contacting one another to express their unease with the thought of paying such high prices for spiritual counseling and prayer. They were caught between their devotion to Juanita and their growing realization of the financial strain they were putting on themselves. It was evident now that the situation was more complicated than anyone had first thought. But others who were only now learning about it started to wonder if this type of ministry had ever been about. As they heard more stories, they started to suspect that this was just the latest example of what had been going on for years in the world of prominent ministers. The gospel, which had once been a source of hope and community, had gradually changed into a business venture for those who had the charisma and influence to charge whatever they wanted. Amidst the mounting criticism, something unexpected happened. A well-known pastor who was respected in the community, in addition to publicly criticizing Juanita Bynum, he also attacked the entire culture of profit-driven gospel ministries for his work with the underprivileged and disenfranchised. His audacious declaration sent shockwaves through the faith community, reminding people that the gospel was meant to be freely given and that it wasn't something that could be purchased, commodified, or priced in accordance with market forces. This message struck a chord with many people who had become disenchanted with people started to wonder if this trend was only going to get worse. Were other ministers and gospel leaders covertly planning to follow the same path? Would the days of free, open spiritual guidance soon be over, replaced by exclusive events and expensive prayer sessions? The commercialization of faith suddenly wasn't just Juanita and Leandrea in the spotlight. The discussion had broadened to include the broader implications of monetizing religion. Uncertainty across many religious communities, But there was another question that persisted and weighed heavily on many people's minds. If this trend persisted, would the gospel, which is a message of love and salvation, be permanently tainted by the greed that now seemed to define the most well-known names in the industry? The more people considered it, the more they understood that the expensive ministries weren't just a fad, rather, they were a sign that faith was growing more and more caught up in the world's business practices, where success was determined by how much money one made, rather than how many lives one touched. However, despite the growing criticism, Juanita showed no signs of backing down. On the contrary, her responses became more defensive and determined to defend her actions. She went on to explain that the money was necessary to keep her ministry afloat and carry out her mission of helping people, framing the backlash as a misunderstanding because people simply did not understand. Her defenders were becoming fewer by the day, but she believed that those who criticized her were unaware of the logistics and expenses involved in managing a large ministry. The more people questioned the morality of her fees, the more alone she became in the public eye, where the discussion had expanded beyond one woman in her one-hour prayer session to include the future of faith, the role of money in religion, and the expectations of those who follow. The stakes had increased for these leaders, and the question now was whether anyone would dare to alter the course that the industry was taking. As the arguments continued, it became evident that something had to give. Would the faithful continue to fund these expensive ministries, or would they call for a return to the gospel's authenticity and humility? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. The gospel industry's future was threatened, and change was unavoidable as the donations that were once consistent and flowing started to decline as her devoted followers began to wonder if their contributions were actually being used to further the ministry's spiritual goals, or if they were being channeled into the pockets of its leaders. The pressure on Juanita Bynum's ministry became unbearable as the controversy surrounding it continued to develop. It wasn't just the criticism from outside forces anymore. The foundation of her empire was starting to shake as the financial strain began to show its cracks. It seemed as though she was fighting a losing battle, constantly trying to defend her actions as public opinion turned against her. The more she tried to explain, the more it felt like she was sinking deeper into a hole, with questions about her fees, motivations, and the very nature of her ministry seeming to haunt every word she spoke. Her appearances became less frequent, and when she did speak, she no longer exuded the same confidence she once did. Her inner circle began to question whether the ministry could continue as it had, and some of them began to wonder if they had been complicit in something that had veered far from its original mission. Were they part of a system that was exploiting the very people they had promised to serve? They had always believed in the message of hope and salvation, but now that the financial and structural issues were becoming more evident, she was unable to avoid the growing criticism. The turning point was when one of her closest supporters, a fellow pastor who had supported her from the start, publicly distanced himself from the ministry. His audacious statement, "This is not the gospel I know, this is not the mission I signed up for," sent shockwaves through the entire community. His words were a clear call for others who had remained silent until that point. As a result, more leaders in the field began to speak out. Following suit, the community began to speak out about the perils of commercializing spirituality and the significance of going back to the foundations of their faith, where prayer was free and the message was delivered without expecting payment. For Juanita, this was the turning point in her life, when she was unable to conceal herself behind her justifications or the devotion of her followers. The Christian community's once supportive leaders now abandoned her, and the burden of their disapproval was too great to bear. While the media frenzy surrounding her and the ministry showed no signs of slowing down, some of her most devoted supporters started to distance themselves from her, not because they wanted to, but because the pressure to do so was too great. They were torn between their faith and their unease with the growing realization that their spiritual leader was a part of a system that no longer felt pure. The public was demanding answers, and Juanita was coming under more and more scrutiny. The media outlets that had once praised her for her charisma and leadership now turned their cameras on her, looking into every detail of her ministry with a fine-tooth comb. The more they discovered, the more it appeared that her ministry was just a business venture masquerading as a religious organization. Those who had once praised her as a prophet were now wondering if they had been tricked. As the months went by, it became evident that the scandal was negatively affecting Juanita's personal life and health. The stress of defending her actions and attempting to In the quiet moments of introspection, Juanita realized that there were no simple answers. She started to distance herself from her supporters and the media, withdrawing to her private home where she spent more time considering her decisions. The question on her mind was straightforward. Was it too late to change things? Could she go back to the message of love, community, and selflessness that had first inspired her? Or had she crossed a line from which there was no return, been done, and many followers' trust had been broken? She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also realized that the world of ministry and faith was never about perfection, but rather about authenticity, humility, and growth. It was unclear if she would be able to regain that authenticity, but as the story progressed, a surprising turn of events occurred. A few months after the scandal peaked, a fresh wave of support started to come in for Juanita. It wasn't a big group, but these were important. Some of Juanita's followers gradually came back because they saw the possibility of growth and change, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they realized that her journey wasn't just about her public image or wealth, but also about her personal transformation and the way she could help others. For Juanita, this was a glimmer of hope, an opportunity to rebuild. These were people who believed in second chances, the power of redemption, and the idea that everyone, no matter their mistakes, deserves the opportunity to make amends. She had lost a lot, but in some ways, she had gained something more valuable, the opportunity to rediscover the true purpose of her calling. The story of Juanita Bynum and her ministry was far from over. It was a story of struggle, of mistakes, and of redemption. It served as a reminder that even in the most trying times, there's always the possibility of recovery. The road ahead would be difficult, and trust could never be fully restored overnight, but it was a beginning, potential for development and change. It was unclear if Juanita would be able to return to her previous position as a spiritual leader, but one thing was certain: the journey she had made had permanently altered her, and perhaps that was the most significant change of all.